Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on branded SERPs, the secret to ranking higher. And we have an amazing guest with us, Jason Bernard, who is all about branded SERPs. My name is Gerald Murphy. I work in the solutions team here at Similarweb, specifically within the digital market and intelligence solution. And I'm joined today by Jason. Hey, Jason.
Hi, Gerald. How you doing?
Very well indeed. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing super duper, thank you.
Good stuff. And today we're speaking about one of your favorite topics, branded SERPs.
It's not one of my favorite topics, Gerald. It is my favorite topic.
I love it. Let's dive straight in. So the focus of today's webinar is how to analyze branded SERPs using the Similarweb platform. So just before we deep dive in, both branded and non-branded SERPs provide a massive opportunity for brands. As you can see on the left-hand side, we have done the query of Similarweb. That would be classified as a brand keyword. And when people do searches for brand keywords, branded SERPs are triggered. So there is a difference between the two. You've got brand keywords, which are the individual keywords, and brand SERPs, which is the focus of today's webinar, is what information is presented on what's called the search engine results page, the SERP. On the right-hand side, we have a more generic term. In this case, it's web traffic. That will be called a non-branded keyword, and that particular keyword triggers a non-branded SERP. People are also entities too. So when we speak of branded terms, we actually may be talking about really what can often appear at the start to be a non-branded term. So let's take, for example, Tom Daly. You can see on the left-hand side, Tom Daly has loads of things going on. And I'm sure Jason's going to chip in here around like some of the things that are on the SERP in the UK have just recently come from the US. So I think it's called pills. Is it on the top right-hand side?
Yeah. Well, the first thing, as you were saying, I talk about brand a lot, but in fact, when we talk about brand, I think if we look at it more globally, it's companies, it's people, it's events, it's you say entities, and that maybe is a word that some people don't really know. It's things. It's anything you can identify as a thing. So proper nouns, if you think about it from a grammatical point of view, are entities. Proper nouns in this context of brands. So Tom Daly is in this context a brand. And what's incredibly interesting is in this particular example, I mean, we're starting diving, as it were, in off the deep end in the swimming world, this is one of the richest SERPs, search engine results pages, I've ever seen. And what's incredibly interesting here is 5 or 6 years ago, it would have been 10 blue links with probably some quite old news about the Olympics. It would be out of date. It wouldn't be terribly engaging. It wouldn't have these images. And there on the right-hand side, it's actually an image gallery and it goes through, you can't see it here. And it goes through about 10 photos with photos of, I would assume, Tom Daly in his kind of swimming and diving poises. But you've also got news stories, you've got information about the gold medals he's won, all incredibly up to date. And Google has got incredibly good at not only presenting these rich results that are very engaging, but also presenting very up-to-date information. And you mentioned the pills at the top, lozenges, you could call them. It's a new kind of aspect from, it's been tested a lot in the US, and this appears now to be moving over to other Anglophone countries, and will then move into all the different countries in the world, which is how Google tends to experiment with these new features, tries them out in the US, then moves them across to other Anglophone countries like Australia, Ireland, and the UK, and then expands it out further. And what's really interesting there is Google uses these to identify the different aspects, the different verticals you can look at for Tom Daly, the entity, videos, news. I can't see what the other ones are because it's too small and I've got very bad eyesight. But the idea being I can actually specify which kind of information I want, and it will give me that specific vertical of information or content.
Definitely. And I guess the thing here too, when we're looking in this case at Google, search engines in essence are trying to present the most useful information to us. And in this case, if someone is doing a search for Tom Daly, it may be to find out more about him. It may be to find out in this case, what sort of things has he done recently? So what events has he been part of? Actually, it may be about him personally, which explains why there's photos and stuff on here. It's a really rich experience and a fantastic example of what an ideal branded SERP looks like. And again, You can see on the right-hand side, we've got the keyword Olympics. Very similar story here, Jason, in the sense of it's so rich. There's a lot of information on Google.
Yeah, and the Olympics is, as I said earlier on, a proper noun, therefore an entity, therefore this is a brand SERP, because the Olympics, I think it's even a registered trademark, probably, knowing that kind of IOC organization, I think they're called. But yeah, I mean, once again, we're using these as examples because these are extremes. This is extremely up-to-date, extremely rich, and most brand SERPs, I mean, if you're a company or a normal person, you wouldn't expect to see this amount of visual and interactive content and this amount of detail, nor this up to date. But you know, maybe this is where Google's going. If you've got trending news, it wants to show it, and it's definitely trying to get there, and it's definitely doing a very good job in certain industries, in certain circumstances.
Absolutely. And I think this is a really nice example too, actually, when we're looking in this case of Tom Daly, an Olympian, and the branded term Olympics. I think it's really good and crucial to get the point across as well that Google actually understands what's going on, not just in relation to that thing, but actually at this moment in time. It knows the Olympics are happening. It knows where it's happening, what events are coming up. And that's actually where Google is getting really clever with not just what piece of content is this and what is this thing. It's actually what can we present to the searcher that's most relevant today? And that's really, really crucial as well. And what we want to do in today's webinar is take you through a range of examples like this so that you guys can better understand, first of all, what is your branded SERP now? But crucially, what else can you do to improve your branded SERP tomorrow?
Right. And really quickly, before, just to finish off on that, because I think there's a really important point to be made, is that Google is trying to give its user, and don't ever forget that people searching on Google are its users, they're not yours. They might be your audience, but they're Google's users while they're on Google. They might also be your users. But what Google is trying to do is give its user the answer to their question, or the solution to their problem as quickly and efficiently as possible. And in branded terms, that usually means coming to your site or finding out more about you. So what it's trying to do is present its user with the most helpful, valuable, and relevant information about that brand on that SERP so that the user can choose how they want to interact with the brand.
Absolutely. And again, in this example, we've looked at a few things, including some of the new features like the pills, as you can see in the top right of both of these screen grabs. But just in terms of what we'll be looking at today are some of Similarweb SERP feature opportunities. So again, if you're new to this space, in its simplest form, a SERP feature is a piece of information that's on the search engine results page. But the more pieces of information you can get on there creates a really rich SERP feature experience. And crucially, what it's doing is helping you to have a much better representation of your brand online. So if you have a brand, for example, and you have an app, there's a way in which you can actually optimize your app so that it also appears on the SERP when someone does a search for your brand. And that's even better because what you're doing is providing your customers, whether new or returning customers, to actually showcase other things that you have online. And in essence, this is also helping you to optimize your various digital assets to become a better representation of your brand.
Which is absolutely brilliant. I mean, as you made the point, it actually improves your own content for your own users. Even though your starting thought was, let's make it look better on Google, it spreads out very quickly and incredibly effectively across your entire digital ecosystem. I'm sorry, I keep cutting in.
I love it. No, bang on. You say the most amazing things and very simple as well, which is what I love. Now, again, the one thing to note is that actually SERP features themselves change a lot. But crucially, and going point to a point we made around the Olympics, Google knows what's going on today. And it actually gets keyword intent incredibly well. So what you can see in this chart is the percentage of keywords that have Google Maps on them for Google UK on desktop across January 2020 to December 2020. Now, of course, as the good old saying goes, unless you've been living under a rock, you'll know COVID happened globally across many countries. But I think what's really interesting about this is Google Maps was trending massively upwards towards the start of last year. But then it is completely went the reverse. It's decreased significantly. And what this is actually saying is that Google's understood that people's movements have been restricted. And as a result, it's also associated that with the SERP feature of local pack or Google Maps. So when we're talking of SERP features, don't always put your eggs in one basket, so to speak, where I'm going to just do quick answers and that's it. That can change significantly. Now, this is probably a very contrast way to show that, but Google does get intent. And there may be things and changes in the market that we maybe don't even see, they're unforeseen, in which case you don't want to over rely on one SERP feature itself. Jason, any comments around Google Maps and COVID in general?
Yeah, I mean, the Google Maps example, we were digging into that, and that's when we discovered this. And we looked at the data and thought, actually, it's dropped off. As soon as COVID happened, especially on mobile, that's the desktop version, but on mobile, you could see this drop off. And Google was saying,
Massively.
actually, people can't go to these shops. So there's no point in showing them a Google Map pack. And another example would be trending news. If there's big news that comes out in the industry, all of a sudden, news boxes are going to be appearing all over the place. And also, in fact, interesting enough, with COVID in France, I'm based in France, we saw news boxes on a lot of traditionally commercial local terms, because people were looking for the news about, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I go here? And so you ended up with these map packs. I mean, I don't have the exact data, but in France, at least, for a few of my clients, instead of going to get your MOT, that was showing news about what are the rules about actually going out to get your MOT. And the answer was, actually, you can most of the time, although there was a period last year when you absolutely couldn't. And you probably would have been, in France, it was €150 fine.
Very good. Very, very interesting. But again, definitely making sure that we are looking at various SERP features. So when we go through the platform shortly, it's not just saying, oh, I want to have Twitter in my branded SERP. It's making sure that we're thinking of other things to make it even richer. And as Jason mentioned previously, it's actually providing better content and more relevant content to your users too.
Right. And there's an interesting point as well, which you can leave that screen. That's absolutely fine. Is what I've noticed. I did an interview with the guys at Bing, the team leads at Bing, who are actually very open about how their algorithm works. And what was interesting is they told me lots of what I would consider to be, industrial secrets. They were very, very generous with the information. And Gary Ilias recently said on Google podcast, Gary Ilias is the guy at Google who explains to us all how Google functions, and they're very secretive. But he actually said, all of these search engines work pretty much the same. And the implication of that is what the people at Bing told me is applicable to Google. Most of the time, obviously not in the details. But one of the things they mentioned was, although these rich elements seem to be taking over our lives, and in the Olympic example, it rarely is, the average number of blue links, which is the normal results that we used to when we used to have just 10 boring, a list that you could choose from, compared to rich elements, is staying very stable and has done for the last few years. And the people at Bing, Frederick Debut, was saying, who's the core algorithm guy, was saying this isn't going to change. It's always going to be about 7 or 8 blue links on average, and 2 or 3 rich elements. So they will tend to swap the rich elements in and out. That obviously is an average. So it's an average across the entire world, all the industries, all the geos. But the guy who runs the whole page algorithm, and that's a whole rabbit hole we shouldn't go down today, was pointing out to me that some can be very rich and some can be not so rich, and that can be to do with intent. And we'll get back to that when we look at Facebook, I hope, later on, which is a very interesting example about a branded search where the intent is incredibly obvious. And so what they do is they will adapt the page to suit the need of the user, once again, to get that user to satisfaction as efficiently and effectively as possible. Once again, reminder, they're Google's users before they're yours in this
Absolutely.
circumstance.
And yeah, what I want to do now is actually, before we go in and look at examples, I know you mentioned Facebook 100%. Let's dive in. For anyone that's maybe new to Similarweb and isn't really sure what the solution does, I want to just spend 5-10 minutes just taking you through, roughly speaking, how and what types of insights do we have around keywords. So the first one is a keyword research section. And what you're able to do in here is have the ability to actually get keyword ideas. We call that a thing called keyword generator, and we actually have it across 3 engines because actually our behavior is massively different on Google versus Amazon versus YouTube. I think I looked just a few weeks ago here in the UK when we had a heat wave, and our data was actually showing that a lot of people, yes, were on Google searching for air conditioning units, but actually on YouTube, it was around a lot more inspirational content. So for example, how to clean an air conditioner unit or how to actually hide an air conditioning unit. So when we're looking at these keywords, be mindful that it can be that they're a core topic, but there's other little sub keywords off the back of them. So in here, for example, if you wanted to get an idea of, I've got shoes, I sell shoes on my website, I want to rank better on Google. What you can do in here is put in your core or head term, as it's sometimes called. And what you're also able to do is to get keyword ideas based on this core term. By default, we always look at worldwide desktop. However, if you want, you can look at a particular country or market in which you actually want to do keyword research of. So in here, what this is going to do is help us to narrow down where specifically do we want to sell shoes or write content about shoes. So what we can do in the platform is using the buttons on the top right-hand side, filter from worldwide to our country that we want to get information on, and as well as switching from desktop to mobile. And some of the key metrics in here will be keyword ideas relating to, in this case, shoes, but this can be against anything. We will, of course, do branded examples shortly, but it's just to give you a flavor for what information we have. So when we present keywords, generally speaking, we'll give you the search volume of them over 12 months. So you can get on average how many people are carrying out a search for this keyword. So in this case, we can see the term shoes itself is being searched for quite significantly. And actually, when we look at the yearly trend, there is overall, when we go from left to right, an increase in demand for that topic. This is really, really useful to know because what it's allowing us to do is to identify topics that are actually growing. And as a result, we can maybe want to create more content on. We also have zero-click information. So we have 4 different data methodologies, one of which is actually real search behavior. And as a result, we have 0 clicks. This is basically what happens after the SERP experience. So what do people do once they do a search for that keyword? And in this case, what we can see is for the keyword shoes, yes, there are a lot of searches. Yes, it's growing month over month over the calendar year. And actually in the last full calendar month, it's at its peak. But actually, a lot of those searches don't actually click on anything. And that may be where that search term is actually too broad. So making sure that when we're looking at our content strategies, we're actually picking terms that actually matter. And actually 0 clicks can help us do that. And then what we can see to the right of that, just for full comprehensive overview, is we have estimated cost per click, which we take directly from Google. And then we have the organic versus paid traffic split. So in other words, it may well be a good opportunity here for both SEO and PPC teams to work together to better actually optimize and actually to improve budget efficiencies. Now, one we're going to use later on is this feature called Analyze Keywords. And this is where we can, on the fly, very quickly analyze what's going on for a particular given keyword, which I'll show you when we look at a branded keyword example. And actually, it's really useful here to find out what are the SERP feature opportunities. But before I go in and show you branded SERP information, I want to take you through another part of the platform that can also be really useful for SERP features specifically. It's called competitive analysis. So in here, for example, what you're able to do is punch in a website. So for example, let's do HubSpot versus Clicksy. So basically digital marketing, more specifically, actually search-oriented websites. And what you'll find in here is the ability to go and find out of all of these 3 websites combined, what keywords do they actually generate traffic from? And you can see that on the left-hand side, we're underneath the search section, keywords. And what you'll see here now is a list of keywords that all of these websites collectively gain traffic from. When you come down, you'll see the keywords there on the left, the amount of traffic they're getting from that keyword, which competitor is winning for it. In this case, HubSpot is getting all of their traffic from HubSpot, no surprise. Then to the right of that, you've got the search volume, cost per click, organic versus paid. But crucially in here, you've also got SERP features. So what you're able to go and find out very quickly are what are the opportunities across all digital assets that we potentially can go and optimize our content for.
And they're really quickly interesting. What you just shown is that HubSpot own the rich elements, the SERP features for their own brand name, which is phenomenally important.
Absolutely. But again, there is also an opportunity here. For example, you can see it's all color coded. So on this little pop-up underneath where it says featured, you've got images, knowledge card, news, and so on. But the ones that aren't colored are related searches and Twitter feed. Jason, what's your view on Twitter when it comes to branded SERPs?
I absolutely love it. I mean, it doesn't suit every business. If you're in a business that's very slow moving, or I was going to say uptight, but that would be unfair to. I was going to say lawyers, for example. that might be difficult if you're a family lawyer, because Twitter is based on this kind of real-time communication and engagement with your audience. And Google will tend to show Twitter boxes on a brand SERP when somebody searches for your brand name, if they see that your audience, a relevant audience, is engaging with your Twitter feed. So I love it. Also because, I mean, one thing I think people don't realize is that Twitter feeds directly into Google. They have a partnership. They're not, obviously, it's a partnership whereby the Twitter feeds actually go straight into Google. It's what we call a hose pipe, which means that Google sees everything in Twitter in real time. So what then happens, I mean, I play what I call the Twitter trick, which is if I tweet something in 15 seconds, that tweet appears on my brand SERP when you search for my name. And that's a real-time control. And it also demonstrates for users, I think, this brand is engaging with its audience. So I think it's a great trick to play if you can do it and if it's relevant to your industry and your audience.
So would you guess then, in this case, HubSpot, are they not either producing good tweets, enough tweets, or what sort of things would indicate that someone wouldn't appear for a Twitter feed?
Right. I mean, and well, that brings us to an incredibly important point: is it's all interdependent. So what Google might be saying is the Twitter feed is interesting and valuable, but this other stuff is more valuable, and I don't want to kill the blue links, as it were, with too many rich elements. So the Twitter feed has been put to one side because it's less valuable in Google's eyes to the audience. But if you don't have a Twitter feed and you think you deserve one and you think it really should be there, the trick is original tweets. Retweets, replies, likes, doesn't really count for much. Original tweets that your audience engages with, that Google sees, will trigger the Twitter boxes. I did an experiment. It takes 6 months from a standing start.
Wow, very, very interesting. And again, it's all endless. Like there's loads of other opportunities there too. And actually this brings us on quite nicely around how do we go and find and see how our branded SERP is performing. So let's actually just switch this up a little bit and have a look at, I think we'll go for Disney. I think it's one of the interesting brands in the sense of, do they actually have a true competitor? Well, it's certainly a brand competitor. This is really interesting because they actually own quite a lot of space and you have a lot of uniqueness. So they've got theme parks across the world in some of the most popular places, including your town of Paris there, Jason. And this can be really, really interesting just to see how these guys are performing for their own branded terms. Now, what we do is we automatically filter branded and non-branded terms. We have an automatic branded, non-branded filter. And essentially, there's 2 steps taken into account roughly. The first is which keywords are sending the most traffic to home pages. Then what we do is match those keywords to the domain structure, and that helps us very quickly identify what we call branded keywords. So let's go and have a look at Disney's branded keywords and find out what sort of little insights and things they're doing. And then we'll actually go into particular keywords. So actually what you can see here is outside of the pure brand term Disney, there's actually a lot of other opportunities here too. So Disney themselves aren't actually doing incredibly well for branded SERPs themselves. They're only ranking here in this case for images and related questions. Jason, any thoughts on this type of branded SERP?
Right. Once again, I mean, it looks strange at first sight until you remember what Nathan Chalmers from Bing was saying, is we're trying to satisfy what the user's actually looking for rather than what you think as a human being might appear for Disney. And Disney's a really interesting case because the SERP is relatively not very rich. It's relatively full of blue links compared to something like Microsoft or even Google, but they have a special case scenario on the search term Disney, and I now call it to do a Disney, which is every single blue link belongs to them. They've got loads of sites. They've got the theme parks, they've got the shops, they've got the main site, they've got their Disney channel. I can't remember what, they've got a job site. And what Google does is say, we're not sure which of these intents is the person looking for a job, for a theme park near them, or are they looking for the Disney store, they're looking for Disney Channel, they're looking for old movies, new movies, whatever it might be. And they give the user just a list of Disney-owned domains to give the user that choice, which is one explanation of why that SERP is relatively less rich than one might initially expect with a major multimedia brand like Disney.
And definitely when it comes to your pure brand, you can see there's a lot more potential experiments with different SERP features. So in the case of the exact phrase Disney, you can see there are actually other SERP features that are triggered and potentially you can actually optimize for. But actually when you scroll down and you'll see variations of those branded terms, actually Disney themselves, whilst they're overall performing incredibly well, are actually potentially missing out on some really good keywords. For example, Disney Plus itself, they don't have any SERP feature for the term Disney Plus. So what this allows you guys to do is using that branded filter, go and actually see what branded keywords do you rank for in the first place, but also what SERP features are there that you potentially can go and optimize your content for.
Brilliant.
So if we go back actually, and let's look at maybe a better competitor, and by better, I mean it's a really highly competitive market. So let's maybe look at adidas.com. And what you can see is we have this feature and functionality that's called similar sites. And what it automatically does is actually helps you to find out who else is in this space. Now, in the case of what we can see here, for the most part, these would all be called brand competitors. So they're ones that are probably often in Adidas. In this case, people would actually relate their brand to be very similar to that one. Whereas you may actually have digital competitors, which is basically competitors that aren't traditionally talked about within these companies, but actually they may rank for a lot of keywords relating to them. So let's add in a few. So for example, if we do Adidas, Nike, in this case, Foot Locker will maybe considered a digital competitor because it only sells one product of many that these two manufacturers sell. So let's go, for example, for Reebok. And actually we can just even stick in those three. Click anywhere else, the screen refreshes. What we're automatically doing in the background is getting all the information for all three of these sites. For example, we've got global rank. So you can very quickly work out. So if we worked, for example, for Adidas, we can find out Nike here is actually doing the best when it comes to web traffic and actually getting good traffic. That by good, I mean page views as well. We can tell you for any country, what is the global rank. So you can see quite clearly here, Nike.com is actually not only the best globally, but very clearly within the United States, much, much better than the other two brands. And then on the right-hand side, within the industry here of lifestyle, fashion, and apparel, it's the fourth traffic generating website in the United States within that particular industry. So let's go and have a look at what these guys are actually doing from a branded SERP perspective. So again, on the left-hand side, we can come in, put in keywords, filter here by branded keywords, apply filter, and let's just see what the data shows. Let's let it load. And then what we can see here is all of the branded keywords in this case that are actually driving a lot of traffic to these websites. Now, again, I am at the moment looking worldwide. However, you want to make sure that you're looking at this from a country particular element. So let's just narrow this down to the United States. And again, just noting in this example, these brands in particular have different domains. So for example, you'll have adidas.co.uk, in which case you'd actually want to be looking at that domain if you're looking at the UK market, for example. But again, in this case, you can see Nike as a brand is looking here and it's optimized for images, knowledge card, local pack, whereas actually Adidas is optimized and ranking for a much bigger range of SERP features.
Wow.
In this case, it's got news, product listing ads. What's your thoughts when it comes to paid search teams when we're speaking about like product listing ads, Jason, when it comes to branded SERPs?
Yeah, I mean, there's a big debate about should you bid on your own brand name, both in terms of Google Ads and also product listings. Uh, and it really does come down to your desire to control what's going on around your brand and also the competition you have around your brand. I mean, Adidas, I would imagine, have a lot of other people bidding on their brand name. But when you actually, when it's your own brand name, naturally, if you create a great campaign on Google Ads or Google Shopping around your own brand, you will pay significantly less than your competitors. So it can be relatively cheap in inverted commas, and a lot of this is done to chase the competitors away. So it's a defensive strategy. And some brands actually advertise whether there's competition or not, simply because they want control. And when you pay, you get control.
And then, of course, we have Reebok in this example of these three competitors that is actually doing by far the worst when it comes to their pure branded term. They only rank and appear for images. In this case, they're missing out on loads of opportunity and potential. What's again, images, I guess, are much, let's say, old school, if I'm being true in saying that, Jason, but like images have been around for as long as anything, really. Any other, have you noticed any other changes? Like, have they been like demoted in the sense of they're further down the page on branded SERPs, or what's your thoughts on images?
Right. I mean, images, they can be considered to be old school, but they are actually very, very relevant for certain verticals. In the real estate vertical, that would tend to be something that's useful for a user. So you need to once again take a step back and say, what's actually going to be useful for a user? In the case of Reebok, I would imagine that people are looking for the images and they're looking for photos of the shoes, but technically they could also trigger videos because I might want to watch the sports people wearing those shoes. And one thing that could be suggested is Reebok could take a step back and say, well, we are actually investing in video, but the video boxes don't appear. We're investing in the wrong places, or Google isn't seeing that our audience is engaging with this content, and Google thinks that our audience engages more with images. What we need to do is prove Google wrong. Make videos of such great quality that it engages our users and put them on the platforms where Google sees that engagement. Google understands that engagement. And then what tends to happen with video boxes and image boxes, obviously not a completely absolute rule. If you trigger image boxes, which, as you said, are relatively easy to trigger, you can then expect your videos to come in and take the place of the image boxes, assuming there are other rich elements around. They seem to be not interchangeable, but if Google's going to drop something to replace it with video boxes, it would tend to be the image boxes.
And I think the other thing, really, definitely coming from a more just general digital marketing perspective, is brands should never really be fearful of other brands as such, particularly with branded SERPs. And I think like one point I think we kind of maybe relay, but I just want to recapture on is we're looking here at three quite large brands, Adidas, Nike, and Reebok. But actually overall, although Nike gets a lot of traffic globally and by probably what's their most important market, the United States, and even actually they're the fourth best website within the fashion apparel space. When we could dig in and look at what they're doing from a SERP feature perspective for their branded terms, they're actually sometimes missing out on some opportunities. So, for example, Nike student discount, or even as you can see down here, you've got Nike shorts. They're just not appearing for any other brand types of terms. So although big dominant brands can be seen initially as, oh, you can't be better than them, you actually can when you dig into the data.
And well, that's a brilliant point on two fronts. Number one is you've just identified in the space of 3 seconds two big holes in their content strategy, in their communication strategy, and their SEO strategy. And what I love about brand SERPs is you can immediately see the holes in your digital marketing strategy. You can see where the content is missing, where you're not producing the content, and where other people are taking, or other companies are taking these spots on your branded terms, or for the rich elements in particular, that you should be dominating. So A, you've got a hole in your content, but secondly, those competitors, and for you as a smaller brand, it's a great opportunity to get some visibility on a massive brand like Reebok, is to create the images, create the videos, get yourself onto their branded SERPs and show off.
Absolutely. And then also when you scroll down here, so we're at roughly like position 20 keywords. And again, this initially by default is ranked by the highest traffic generating keywords that are sending traffic to these sites collectively. But you can see sometimes when you scroll down, it's not always the case that, you know, people are actually featured on for different branded terms, different SERP features. So there's some keywords here that are actually, there's no SERP features. These would be what Jason referred to as the 10 blue links earlier. So like Nike, Blazer. You've got other terms in here as well that are basically just not triggering any SERPs. Jason, any thoughts about like if I was a brand, I come in here and I can find keywords that actually have dashes. In other words, they're 10 blue links. Is there actually any way for me to optimize certain digital assets to appear on that SERP?
Yeah. I mean, that's a brilliant question, and it's a really important point, because I think a lot of us look at these rich elements, the SERP features, and we think, I need to steal somebody else's place. That's easier to do, I would argue, than the blue links, because the blue links is this kind of long-standing system whereby anybody who's ranking for a short head term for something very popular in the blue links is going to have a big history, big backlink profile, loads of SEO advantages. Rich elements, relatively simpler. But in fact, you don't just need to look at replacing other people or other brands in these rich elements. You can also look at it and say there's a whole, the fact that there aren't any rich elements means that Google hasn't found the content that is of sufficient good quality, that brings sufficient value to trigger the rich element. And if you can produce the content that provides that value to Google's user on the search that they've made, in this case for Reebok Blazers, you can get images. I would go for images right off the bat there. And I would start with images and start planning videos. So one really nice trick there, and it's you basically hit both at the same time. YouTube videos with great thumbnails. The thumbnails will trigger the images first, the videos will follow. So you've got this brilliant short, mid, long-term strategy where one's bouncing off the other, and you could potentially end up with both places. And I've seen it where you get the thumbnail and the video, and your visibility with a really good thumbnail on a SERP full of blue links, when you've got a colorful thumbnail. If you search for CaliCube, you'll see lots of colorful thumbnails. That's why we do it, because it jumps out in the people's face. They can't miss your brand name.
Absolutely. Really, really fantastic point. So again, I think for anyone watching this as well, either today or later on, it's actually making the point here that what you see and also what's triggered shouldn't be your limit. You should always go above and beyond and have a little look and see what other branded terms do I, first of all, even appear for, but actually, what other SERP features can I as a human, because Google is actually thinking as a human would constantly. When you look at some core parts of their algorithm, like for example, Hummingbird, which is all around context too, so turning queries into strings, and that's evolved into entities and so on. But actually looking at all of your branded keywords together and thinking about what SERP features, what in essence digital assets would be most appropriate for that particular term. So for example, actually you can see again our little friends here at Nike, the query here, Nike return policy, there's again nothing on the SERP. The incredible experience here to actually have things like videos, quick answers, all of those good things, just so that someone actually can further relate to the brand and actually make arguably it a much easier process. What is the policy in a short summary? What do I need to do? Can I post it back? Do I need to drop it into a local place? Do I need to go in store? All of that information can be really nicely structured so that in this case, Nike can actually appear on the SERP directly to better improve the customer experience online.
And yeah, and that's a really good point as well. I mean, customer service is a great example that a lot of brands completely miss out on. And it's got a hidden benefit, which is if people find the answer on Google that you have provided and they know that you've provided it and that it is the correct answer, they don't call your client support line. Exactly. Which is wonderful. And they're happy because they've got the answer without actually having to wait with that awful message that asks you to press lots of buttons. but also your support staff are saving time. They don't need to actually deal with these repetitive, boring questions.
Exactly.
So you're saving money, your support staff are happier because they're not repeating themselves incessantly all day, and the person is happier because they got the answer right off the bat really quickly from you through Google.
Completely. And that actually was bringing me on to a point, especially when it comes to return policies, like having a good, clear idea of the phone numbers in all of the different countries the brand operates in is really, really crucial. But Google also understands that, from the country codes of the phone numbers to actually you and the content specifying the country dash, then the phone number. Like, it takes all of that into account, and it actually has a good idea of, in this case, what is the phone number within the country that the searcher's searching from.
Right, absolutely brilliant. And Google's getting much, much better at, I mean, that's a good example, is the phone numbers. I mean, I look a lot at knowledge panels, and what a lot of brands don't realize, international brands especially, is Google will show the customer care number or the customer support number in the knowledge panel as fact. And so making sure that it understands which number corresponds to which country seems like an incredibly obvious point. But you'd be very surprised at how many brands get that wrong. And when they say Google's getting it wrong, Google's stupid, Google's misunderstood because you've explained it badly.
Completely.
So you need to take a step back once again and say, why is Google getting this wrong? I need to correct the information on my website that's made Google misunderstand. So your responsibility, you're the responsible adult in the room. Google is the child you are educating, in terms of your brand, at least.
Really nice way of putting it, because I think we often think, like, can I rank on Google? Is it possible to do that? If you teach it and do it well, it is possible. Completely.
And teaching, I mean, the teaching analogy starts with brand SERPs, and it's a perfect analogy for brand SERPs. I know who I am, I know what I represent, and I know what I sell and who my audience is. All I need to do is explain it to Google, this child, make sure that Google understands and is confident that it's understood, which is a very important point that people miss. But then I think you make the point is you can take that analogy further and say, if I can teach Google that I'm better than the competition for the same service, I win the SEO game.
Absolutely. And then, of course, it's also important here to try and think about what is the user intent or keyword intent behind searches, including brand keywords themselves. So what I'm in now is I've gone back to keyword research. I'm underneath the analyze keyword section. And in this case, we're looking at overview. And I've typed in one of Jason's favorites, actually, Facebook, because it's actually really, really unique branded SERP, I would argue, because actually what you can see in here is another new metric that we didn't see in the previous screens, and it's a thing called zero click. So this is actually looking at the percentage of search queries where users did not click on any of the results. And you can see that that actual number is really, really low for Facebook. In other words, the majority of people in this case in the United States always click on Facebook. So in other words, they're actually using the pure brand term of Facebook to actually navigate and find the Facebook website, either because they haven't bookmarked it or they just they do this as a way of life, a behavior that they have online.
Yeah, and you can see that the Facebook.com at the top there gets 98% of the 85%. And so it really, truly is a navigational term. People are just navigating to Facebook using Google as a stepping stone. And once again, Nathan Chalmers from Bing, that was the example he told me about. He said, when people type in Facebook, we know exactly what they're trying to do, and that's get to Facebook's site. And what I love about this is just confirmation that what Nathan was explaining to me about brand SERPs and how they function and how Bing deals with this and how they're trying to bring the best solution, the most efficient solution to their users' problem. In this case, just getting to the Facebook site because I'm too lazy to bookmark it. That's their aim. That's the goal.
That's exactly it. And I guess because in particular Facebook, and in this example here, even Nike, I guess they're such established brands that have been around for years. I guess that's almost like a behavior, an online behavior that the users just generally do.
Yeah. And that's a really good point. The really established brands, I think we would tend to say, and I would love to do a webinar just about this, about where people are going and what the behavior is on these different brand SERPs. And the smaller brands, I would argue, there is navigational intent, but let's say less so. And a lot of research intent. I'm not sure about this brand. I'm not convinced by this brand. I'm thinking of doing business with it, but I would like to know more. And the SERP can serve both the purpose of navigating, especially for existing clients, which would be massively the case for Facebook. But also, I would argue the 15% who don't click are probably thinking, what can I find out about Facebook? Is there any, in Facebook's case, maybe is there any dirty news I can see, or dirty news, not nasty news about them? But for a smaller brand, it will be some at least research into who they are, what they do, and can I trust them? And we trust Google to give us, how can we say it, an unbiased view. So that brand SERP becomes this unbiased view of Google, who instinctively we trust whether we like it or not. I think a lot of people say, oh, I don't like Google. But in fact, instinctively, we now tend to trust it, I believe.
Absolutely. And then just to pick up on a point you mentioned earlier, Jason, which is around, generally speaking, from a paid search perspective, it's cheaper for a brand to bid on their own brand terms. But actually, there are cases when competitors can. And this analyze keyword section allows you to pick up on those, because in this case, I've just switched the keywords to Gymshark. And when you come down, you'll actually see that actually there's a case here. There's other potentially competitors can be up here for your own brand when you're viewing it. But actually, you can find out and analyze that just to see who are my paid competitors versus organic.
And a really quick point on Google Ads and bidding on your own brand name is what I see is a lot of companies wasting a lot of money. Is that they get the quality score of 10 out of 10. If you've done any Google Ads, you think, oh, 10 out of 10, job done. But remember, quality score 10 out of 10, you should get that off the bat if you set up a reasonably good campaign. But that 10 out of 10 isn't a ceiling. It's not granular. And you can keep improving and pushing the cost per click down. And the more you push the cost per click for yourself down, the more it's pushing it up for your competitors. And the more you will chase them off that brand SERP. And I've actually had clients where we've managed to get from 10 out of 10, we've actually managed to get an additional 30% savings, pulling that cost per click down 30%, even after hitting 10 out of 10 for the first time.
And definitely, I think another really important point here too is definitely collaboration is key, but it's also collaboration with those who create videos. And as Jason mentioned there, it's someone who sits in the paid search team too, just showing them these little insights and trying to really create and start those conversations. But equally so, making sure that when you're doing this, you're also analyzing your core markets. So in the case here of Gymshark, and when you scroll down the screen, you'll actually see the SERP features that are actually triggered for this particular keyword. And in this case, for the pure brand term Gymshark, in the United States, they have images, knowledge card, Twitter feed, and related searches. But actually, this doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have those in all markets. So if we switch to the UK, which to Gymshark may be, again, one of their priority markets, when you come down, they're actually doing a bit better here. So again, this is also about trying to make sure that we're analyzing what's going on in each country individually, as well as trying to create those little conversations around what else can we do? How can we create more content around a particular term, like, for example, returns policies and so on, so that you can, in essence, improve your customer experience online through your branded search queries. And then actually, I would argue that your branded search queries are actually 100% about customer experience because they already know who you are.
Yeah. And it is, sorry, I was almost interrupting you, but you just made an even better point than the one I was going to make. So I'll just follow you. But they know who you are. They're searching for you. And you have, in my opinion, as a marketer, as a brand manager, an obligation to make sure that what they see is your brand message in your voice. And there is no reason for Google not to show that. It's trying to represent your brand to your audience, who are a subset of their users, honestly, helpfully, with valuable content. All you need to do is provide it and explain to this child what you're trying to communicate to your audience. And as long as you're honest about it, Google will mostly show what you want it to show. Perfect.
And then when you scroll down in this particular feature, if you're unsure of like which country should I be looking at, scroll down towards the bottom and you'll see your top countries. So in this case for Gymshark, definitely be reviewing your branded SERPs for United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Netherlands, because that's actually where you're generating most of your traffic from. They're ones to get right in terms of where do I start with branded SERPs? Do them in this order. And actually, to find other branded SERP names and opportunities, scroll up to where it says phrase match. Click on this, and this will basically show you all of your other branded terms and actually helping you to better understand what other SERP features can I optimize for, all of those good things, so that you can then further expand your branded SERPs visibility. Not perhaps like Tom Daly in the Olympics, but hopefully you're starting to increase your visibility online.
Brilliant point. And I would say, I mean, one of the things I noticed about SEO in general, and this kind of, once you start digging, you see, oh, I should be doing that, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. And your list gets longer and longer. And then at the end of the day, you've got this list, which is as long as my two arms are that you can't see. And you're completely overwhelmed. Now, what I love about exact match brand SERP, your brand name, is if you start there, you're focusing on something relatively small. You make that right and you build out with all the rest of the stuff. And I guarantee you, if you do it that way, the overwhelming big long list will slowly come down. And at no point when I've been doing it this way, starting to build my digital strategy from the exact match brand SERP outwards, at no point have I got incredibly frustrated as I have in the past when I've tried to build it from the outside in.
Absolutely. And then just to kind of maybe sort of in terms of functionality, one of the ones we'd like to end on today is one of our newer ones. It's called ranking distribution. So essentially what this allows you to do is to find out how well you're performing on Google in terms of the number of keywords and the rank positions they appear. So in this case, we've got Adidas, Nike, and Reebok. You can see here we've got position bands, so positions 1 to 3, 4 to 10, and so on. But what we also have here is the ability to actually see SERP features. So what you can do in here is find what all of the branded keywords you actually rank for on Google over time. It's updated on a monthly basis. But what you can also do here from a branded search perspective is go and find out, well, do I rank and how is my rank trend for particular SERP features? So if you're specifically wanting to find out, do any of these brands have Twitter feeds? Are they in the news? Do they have any instant answers? Simply just select the ones you're interested in, click on see trend, and it will very clearly show you actually that sometimes SERP features, although at a keyword level, brands are doing incredibly well. Overall, when it comes to the volume of keywords that actually rank really, really high, this actually can uncover of actually what they're performing like over time, which can be really interesting too.
Right. And that actually brings me to the point I was going to make earlier on, which is about news. I mean, if we found a really great example, but we're not going to do it off the cuff here. But if you look at news over time on these branded searches, you would actually see a pattern of presumably product releases. In the case of Adidas, Reebok, and so on and so forth, Olympic success, World Cup success, is that they would tend to come and go with the news around the brand. So you can actually track the news PR activity around your brand over time using Google as this kind of measuring stick, which is A, free, and B, incredibly representative, because nobody in the world has as much data about all this stuff as Google.
And that's actually a fantastic point when it comes to the platform. So we'll wrap up on slides here shortly, but you make a fantastic point around news. So when we look at the Olympics at a keyword level under analyze keywords, under worldwide, you can actually see that news has the most types of content on as regards to SERP features for the brand term Olympics. In this case, you can see 62 different websites are regularly shown for news.
Wow. And that's great. And also looking into news, what we're doing at Kalicube Pro, I mean, we specialize in brand search specifically. And what we're doing at Kalicube Pro is pulling out which news sites are ranking for which kinds of brands in which industries, in which geo regions, because that can help you with your outreach to journalists and your PR work. And it saves you boatloads of time. I had a client who said, oh, actually, we instead of contacting 20 different media outlets, we contacted 4 and we got 2 successes. And we used to have to contact 20 to get 2 successes because we were asking the right people, because they were ranking in our industry for our entity type in our geo region.
Absolutely. Definitely, guys, the main takeaway is to look both at your branded and non-branded keywords. Definitely don't have a keyword strategy, it's just swayed towards one for sure. Look at both. But again, today, in terms of the reason why we looked at branded is, first of all, it's a much easier way to get into the SERP feature space, to understand the different SERP features that are triggered. And actually, it's easier to rank and optimize for SERP features using branded terms. So making sure you're analyzing the SERP features for both your branded and non-branded keywords. But again, if you have never done this before, and as we've seen, Nike clearly hasn't done a lot with their branded SERPs, definitely have a little look and see, what branded keywords do I rank for? What SERP features do I think will be applicable to some of the ones that actually have a lot of searches, like, for example, return policies and so on? Other big top tip and takeaway is there are many benefits of optimizing for branded SERPs alone outside of non-branded. First of all, it's less competitive. You know, you're not going for a really super broad generic name as well. So I think you mentioned there, Jason, like there's some branded names where actually they're classified, strictly speaking, as a brand, but actually they're more generic in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a brand name that's actually a generic term, if you've called your company Yellow Door or Red Shoe, you've got a big problem in terms of your brand SERP. It's very difficult for people to, it's very difficult for Google to disambiguate, because you might actually be looking for Red Shoes or Red Shoe, the company, which creates enormous problems for that. But as a general rule, if you've picked a relatively unambiguous name within your geo region, you will be able to control that brand SERP relatively easily. And what I do like is, it's like the ski slopes. I don't know what they're all called, but I know one of them is black, and that's the worst one. Then it's red, then orange, then yellow, then green, let's say. Your brand SERP is the green slopes of SEO. It's the easy start.
Love
because
the
it's
analogy.
a controlled it's controlled environment, and you can actually, Google's looking for this content actively. It's looking for the content from you actively. So you're really on the green slopes, and it's a nice, easy way into SEO. Once again, build from the brand SERP outwards, and you'll be a happy puppy.
I love the analogies, Jason. And also, of course, branded SERPs and keywords are a representation of your brand itself. Make it a brilliant representation. Like, that's exactly what it's all about. And of course, the competitors of branded keywords also adds to, you know, your competitive intelligence. So that's to say, knowing what branded terms you actually generate traffic from, like even knowing those, as Jason mentioned earlier, it's making sure you're reducing things like people easy to find the phone number, so they're not, you know, emailing and actually wasting more resources asking these FAQs. Actually optimize your content for all of those branded keywords to properly succeed online. Jason, a really, really massive thank you from everyone here at Similarweb. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you for inviting me. That was absolutely delightful. We've been talking the last kind of couple of months about all this, and I was really keen to do it. You're incredibly smart, great insights from the Similarweb team. I've enjoyed it greatly, and I've learned a lot from talking to you and the rest of the team at Similarweb.
Indeed. We have just a few questions, Jason, if you don't mind. So John is asking, when looking at a specific niche, is there an advised way to hit several countries in a fast way without losing a lot of time? For example, on an education article for a product or service?
Well, I mean, from a content perspective, if you're aiming to hit multiple countries at the same time, make sure that the content you're creating isn't going to be geo-specific. You know, but then you've got to balance that as well with the fact that in the UK, maybe the educational needs are slightly different, or the rules are slightly different to in Ireland or the US. So you've got to balance that out from a content perspective, at least. Make sure, if you're trying to reduce the effort that it takes, make sure that you are creating content that will suit all those different markets.
Fantastic. And literally like perfection, we're right at the hour, which is amazing. Jason,
Brilliant.
Pleasure as always. Look forward to speaking to you soon. And thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. See you soon.